Are you curious about how our city continues to grow and develop while preserving its unique character? If so, look no further. We're diving into the role of the Durham City County Planning Department and the Planning Commission. These two entities work tirelessly to guide the growth and development of our city, ensuring that it remains a vibrant and thriving community for all who call it home. Welcome to City Life. I'm Beverly Thompson. Joining me to talk about how planning is helping to shape Durham's future is Sarah Young, Director of City County Planning Department. And we have Austin Amendolia. He is the Chair of the Planning Commission. Welcome to you both, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
So Sarah, let's get started with you. What does the Planning Department actually do, and how is it structured within the county?
So we are a joint department of about 50 employees, and we are the planning agency for both the City of Durham and Durham County. That means we have two primary charges. The first is long-range planning, which is basically figuring out what our community is going to look like in the future as we grow and develop. And the other is ensuring compliance with our development regulations. So when someone proposes to do something with their property, making sure that they're following all the rules. So we have kind of a dual function, both visionary and regulatory.
That's a big assignment, I would imagine, for any city. But Austin, tell me about the Planning Commission. What is your role actually in the planning process?
Yeah, so we have a fairly defined role within all that planning does. So the Planning Commission is a 14-member board comprised of 7 members who were appointed by the City Council and 7 members appointed by the Board of County Commissioners. The members appointed by the Board of County Commissioners, they also have a geographic targeting, so they're from all different parts of the County of Durham, and we are an advisory body to the elected officials. So we make recommendations on what policy direction we think they should take regarding rezoning cases, the comprehensive plan, and our zoning ordinance, the Unified Development Ordinance.
So does a person actually need any kind of planning experience to be on the commission?
Technically, no, because the city council members and the Board of County Commissioners, they choose from a set of applicants who sits on that board. Now, often they choose people who have a background either in design or planning or development of some sort, because those people have a certain expertise that helps inform their decisions on the Planning Commission.
So based on that, what are some of the specific duties of the Planning Commission?
Yeah, specifically, we will review rezoning cases and make recommendations as to what we think the City Council or the Board of County Commissioners should vote on with those rezoning applications. So if someone wants to develop a piece of land and they cannot develop it the way they want within the current regulations, they have to come to the Planning Commission to get a change for us to allow them or recommend whether or not they should be allowed to do that and have their zoning changed to allow for a different type of development. Then they go to either the City Council or the Board of County Commissioners to get the actual approval, and the elected officials can use our recommendations to inform their decision.
So when you say rezoning, you're actually referring to changing the use of a particular piece of land or property, right?
It could be changing the use. It could also be changing the density. So we have, within our residential zoning, we have different densities of residential zoning. So it could be that they have a residential rural zone that allows for, I think, about a house per acre, to a higher level of density so they could have multiple houses in an acre. It could be from residential to commercial, from office to industrial. It could be any sort of change, but it's usually between uses or increasing or decreasing density. Well, not decreasing density, only increasing density.
It's a challenging area. I have to tell you, when I first started, just learning, with the city, just learning what some of those terms meant, that really can change how Durham looks, was a big challenge. So to help guide you through this whole process of planning, what are some of the tools and mechanisms that you use?
So we have a couple of really big tools that are really important. One is the comprehensive plan. And so Earlier when I was talking about we're visionary and regulatory,
Yeah.
the comprehensive plan is our biggest, broadest visionary document. It really lays out how and where development should happen in the future, what type of development should occur. It's got lots of different components, and we're in the process right now of creating a new comprehensive plan. So that it just finished up at the Planning Commission recently, and we'll be going to our elected bodies in August.
How long have you been working on that, by the way?
That was a project that we started back in 2019, before the pandemic. So the pandemic slowed us down a little bit, but we've been making good progress, and we're excited about that. It's long overdue. Our past plan dates from 2005.
Wow.
And so you know that a lot has changed in this community.
Definitely.
In that time frame. But the plan has, it's got goals, it's got objectives, policies, action items, specific things that we need to do to reach the desired outcomes. It also has a map component that every single piece of property in the city and county is on that map and is assigned what we call a place type. So that is in essence the future vision for that property. And in some cases it's no different than what the property is today, but in other cases we are forecasting a change, so that is contained there. So that's on the visionary kind of end. Our other really big important document or tool that we have is our Unified Development Ordinance, and Austin mentioned that briefly. That is on the regulatory side, the rules that you develop property by. And so oftentimes, people wonder how is it that a policy from the comprehensive plan actually becomes, a thing. That's the role of the ordinance, to implement a lot of the policies. So we may have a policy, for instance, that says, design safe multimodal streets. Well, that's aspirational. We would like that to be the outcome. But the comp plan doesn't tell us how we do that, how we get there. The ordinance does. So the ordinance, for instance, in that example, would have standards for when you need a sidewalk and a bicycle lane versus when you need a multi-use, off-road path, what the width of those different facilities might be, what surface materials they need to be built from. So the details of how you actually get that is in the ordinance.
So how is all of this approved, and what are the different kinds of approval processes?
So we have three basic types of approval processes, and those come from state law. The first is administrative approvals. Those are essentially when you are just following the rules, right? So as I just said, every piece of property has a zoning designation, and there are rules that go with that. You, by right, have the ability to develop under those rules, and that stays at an administrative approval level, meaning staff approves that. There's kind of the next step up, which is quasi-judicial approvals. Those, by state law, are places where there are rules and regulations, but there's also some discretion. There's some amount of judgment and subjectivity, and under state law, staff cannot make those discretionary approvals. They have to be made by a quasi-judicial board.
Give me an example of a kind of property that would entail
so
something like that.
We have two quasi-judicial boards that the planning department works with. One is the Board of Adjustment, and the other is the Historic Preservation Commission. And I'll use the Historic Preservation Commission as an example because people are familiar with historic districts and historic properties, and so there is a lot of subjectivity in historic preservation in terms of what is compatible or not compatible, and a lot of architectural nuance, and so that has to go before that board to make a decision. The third type of an approval is a legislative approval. And legislative approvals, basically, if you think of administrative approvals are you're following the rules. Legislative approvals are setting or changing or creating the rules, right? So that's where they're approved by elected officials, city council or county commissioners, and they create rules either by creating a new ordinance or changing ordinance requirements, or in the case of a rezoning, changing the zoning district, which changes the rules that apply to that particular property. So those kind of decisions can only be made by the governing bodies.
So I was going to ask you, is there flexibility in any of these tools and mechanisms that you use? And the flexibility is through council. Is that?
Yeah,
it works.
oftentimes, council has the most discretion in any of these approvals. And it depends a little bit on the type of approval. In some rare cases, council is acting in a quasi-judicial fashion, which means like a court of law. Those are very limited in that we don't see those often. But for the most part, when council takes action, they have lots and lots of discretion. They are advised by boards like the Planning Commission. They are advised by staff and the information that we put in staff reports in terms of background and context for them to consider. They consider comments from the public in public hearings, but ultimately the basis of their decision doesn't have to be grounded in any specific policy or law. State law really gives them broad authority to use their judgment.
Okay. So from your perspective, when you review, say, a zoning change request, you aren't really making a recommendation one way or another, or you're just doing an analysis, or how does that work?
So staff performs an analysis. We, by ordinance, are required to look at our adopted plans and policies and give that analysis to our elected officials for them to consider. There are some requirements in the ordinance for zoning districts, right? We wouldn't allow someone to petition to change to a district where that property, doesn't meet the size minimums or some other aspect, right? So it is a bit of a compliance check, but it's also an analysis of how well does this align with the stated vision and intent that the community has helped shape for our community. And so we provide that. We don't make a formal recommendation, but we do provide all that analysis to our elected officials.
Okay. So Austin, walk me through the process. If a new development is proposed, where do you come into the process, and then what do you do?
Yeah, so when a new development is proposed, it kind of depends on whether or not it is proposed to follow the ordinance as it is written, or if it needs to be rezoned in order to comply with the ordinance. And so when they need a zoning map change, we come into the process after staff has done their analysis. They provide a report to the Planning Commission with their recommendation based on the comprehensive plan goals and objectives, and then we have a public hearing where anybody who wants to come and speak on the case either for or against has the opportunity to do so. And then we, as a planning commission, the 14 members deliberate and have conversation about the specific proposal, and then we take a vote that serves as our recommendation to whichever elected officials where the property is within their jurisdiction.
It seems like we have an awful lot of items that come before council. And is this pretty typical in any city? People here are just passionate about planning, and that's not a bad thing, for sure. Yeah. But why are we so passionate about what happens in Durham? I'm not saying we should or shouldn't be, but I mean, what brings that passion, do you think?
Well, I think one thing that I think about it is it's one of the ways that most people, it'll be the only way that they interact with government is through a rezoning change. Most of the time, if you're living in a more suburban or rural part of Durham, like yes, you're getting your utilities and your sewer from them if you're within the city limits, but outside of that, you don't often directly interface with the elected officials. It's really when a rezoning is happening next to your neighborhood that suddenly you're like, oh, there's these elected officials that, I know there was an election nearby and maybe I voted in it, maybe I didn't, but now is a chance where the decisions they're making directly impacts what is happening around me. So I think that's where a lot of the passion comes from, just in any municipality. Like, we need more houses, but like, what does that mean for the environment? And there's so many questions that get raised, and many of them are moral and personal, and people start to amplify, like, these are my morals and they're different than your morals. And so then suddenly we're having an argument about morals because somebody wanted to build 50 houses next door. And that's like, that gets really big really quickly, and it makes the conversation hard to have and to remember, like, oh, we're both human though. We both live in the same city and we both care about where we live and have the same goals.
Well, and I think that, development is something that is so tangible, and decisions about development, right? You see those. There's so many other decisions that government makes that are invisible, I think, to the average person. But development decisions, you will see those happening next to you. And so I think that heightens it to a different level in people's consciousness, and it makes them more likely to get engaged about something that is going to come out of the ground next to their house.
And it really shows to me a pride in your community, you know, wanting to be a part of what's going on and to make a difference, and to see it be a place you'd be proud to live in, and also your kids, you know, to grow up in. So kudos on what you guys do.
People have this sense that as planners, we can approve or deny something because we want to. And as I mentioned earlier, you know, in an administrative approval, which is the only kind that staff has authority to do, we're really limited. We don't have discretion, right? If someone meets all the regulations, by law, we're required to approve it. Even if the neighbors don't like it, even if we get 400 emails, you know, complaining, asking for us not to approve it, I still have to follow the law and I still have to approve it. And that's a really unsatisfactory thing to hear,
imagine,
you know, from an agency official that you reach out to with a concern. We often, when I have those conversations with folks and try to kind of explain the legal framework that we have to work within, you know, I often hear people say, well, these things shouldn't be administrative. They should all go to the elected officials, and the elected officials should be the ones approving everything. And so I quickly try to explain, you know, administrative approvals exist for a reason. In Durham, in our department, we process over 7,500 approvals a year. Out of those 7,500, only about 300 are either quasi-judicial or legislative. So we are staff, the 50 of us are processing over 7,000 applications. There's no way that our elected officials have the bandwidth or the time or the meetings to process all that. So it's not, the process is not intended to cut out residents' opportunities to weigh in on projects. It really is a matter of efficiency. And when you know, live in a big jurisdiction like ours, it's a necessary way to process applications.
Okay. So Austin, what about your commission? What are some of the most common misconceptions about what it is you do or have power to do?
Yeah, there's a few. I think the primary one is that we have authority. So when we take a vote, it is simply a recommendation. And we build relationships with the elected officials so that they understand where we are coming from when we make recommendations. But at the end of the day, the elected officials have the right to do whatever they want. So sometimes people, after we recommend a denial of a case, they'll say, okay, well, what happens next? And it's like, the city council, the county commissioners, they get to do what they want now. They can take our advice into account, or they can choose that they disagree, and that's their right. So that's the primary one. I think the other one, sometimes people think we're elected, and we're not. We are appointed by the city council and county board of commissioners. Like, we don't run for office, and this is a volunteer opportunity that we all take. And then I would also say sometimes people think that we are merely advocates, which is simply not true. Like, we're professionals with expertise in many different fields. Like, we work in real estate, we work in affordable housing, we have multiple people on the Planning Commission who have degrees in urban planning. And so we actually, while we may have more idealistic viewpoints on what we can be doing, it doesn't mean we're just doing it because we're advocates. We're doing it because we have a background and expertise that we use and informs our practice.
Well, and similarly, you know, we often hear that we don't advocate enough as staff for, you know, causes or concerns, and we do have a proactive side of us. Sometimes that's not really seen by the public, but even in our administrative approvals, when we hear concerns from residents, we reach out to developers and try and negotiate on behalf of those residents and seek a better outcome, even if it's not required by ordinance. You know, sometimes developers say, no, I'm only doing the bare minimum, and then that's all we can do, but we always try. And that's something that I think the average resident doesn't see and doesn't know that we do.
So when a resident thinks that you're not advocating enough, what might be something that they'd want you to advocate for?
Often it's, you know, they're concerned about the direct impacts of development on their property. And so in fact, yesterday I was out on site at a project, and residents were talking to me about concerns about losing some of the trees between their homes and this potential development. And those trees are not necessarily, required. And I said that we would reach out to the developer and talk to them and see, what could be done, if they would be willing to keep some of those trees, maybe make some improvements, so it's a nicer transition to this residential neighborhood.
Great, great. So, Zara, what are some of your most pressing issues as it relates to development and planning?
And I think overall right now it's just managing growth. We have seen the past few years particularly an unprecedented pace of development. We thought when the pandemic first hit that maybe things would slow down, and the opposite happened, which surprised us, I think, all in the industry really. And so with that comes a lot of impacts and a lot of concerns, whether it's, in our more urban neighborhoods, concerns about gentrification, people being pushed out, whether it's on the edges of the city as our rural landscape turns into suburban development and the environmental impacts with that happening quickly. And then of course, affordable housing. The housing market, I think a proper technical term is it's gone bonkers, right? And
I get it.
It really, the cost of housing across the board has escalated a lot. And so planning in and of itself, we can't fix any one of those things by ourselves, right? But we certainly contribute in various ways through regulations, sometimes through incentives when we can't mandate something. But we are part of a bigger collection of processes that can help with some of those things.
So incentives, how does that work? Incentivizing a developer or someone to do something that makes a difference in the neighborhood, not really negative or...
Yeah, so let me, because when we say incentives in planning, we don't mean like financial incentives. We're talking about usually incentives in terms of ordinance trade-offs, right? We want you, developer, to do something more, something extra. And in order to do that, we recognize that, it's going to cost you. There's a trade-off in it for you. So we will be more flexible in X if you give us more of Y. And again, those things are built into the ordinance, right? Those are not things that staff is wheeling and dealing. Now, those are things that can be negotiated and proffered through legislative processes like a rezoning. And folks will often hear the council ask pointed questions about things like affordable housing or whatnot.
Or schools, making a
or
contribution
schools,
to
exactly.
the schools.
And so developers then have the opportunity to offer of their free will. And that's the important part. Of their free will to try and mitigate some of those impacts that their development may be contributing to. So there's a variety of things. Sometimes the incentives are built into the ordinance, and sometimes it's a negotiation at the legislative level.
So Austin, how can people find out more about the Planning Commission?
Yeah, my biggest recommendation is to just watch and attend our meetings. You can gain a lot of information just by being in the room and hearing the conversations that we as a commission have and the questions we ask of staff. I would also recommend actually reading the comprehensive plan. It has the vision that we've laid out for Durham for the next 30 years. And I hear people all the time, they'll come to me and they'll say, I started reading this document and then it made me ask these other questions about what is happening with transportation, how are we protecting the environment, whatever it may be. And then it can really spark ideas of where people can go based on their interest. And then for a resource outside of Durham, the American Planning Association has some free resources available on their website that can help you get kind of an intro to planning and understand the basic principles of planning and what it is that the field does. They're also available to attend virtually. They stream live on YouTube. I think they even are on cable.
Yeah.
I don't remember which channel because I don't have cable, but I know that they stream on cable and on YouTube, so you can access them fairly easily.
Okay. This has been a really interesting show. I mean, I've learned a lot. Probably should have learned this 10, 15 years ago maybe, but I mean, this is just a good bit of information that your average viewer should know about what is involved in planning for a city. I'm sure there's a whole lot more that you guys could talk about. But if residents want to engage on planning topics, how do they do that, Sarah?
Well, there's a variety of different avenues. We have the Engage Durham website, which is engagedurham.com, and it is a platform where you can get to the new comprehensive plan and engage on that. It is also a platform that we're trying to leverage and share with other departments for projects that they may have. Eventually, I would love to see it as the one portal that residents can go to for anything that the city or county have in terms of engagement opportunities on projects. One of the things that we found in our engagement is that the average resident doesn't know, is this project being run by the General Services Department? Is this a planning project? Is this a transportation project? And so they don't know where to go to start. So having one place where residents don't have to figure it out. They just go there and they can look at all the available opportunities of what's going on is something that we've really been pushing for. So we hope that platform will be expanded and more of our partner departments will really come on board and want to share their projects there too.
Sounds good.
So that's one place. We also, on our website, have something called the Growth Management Engagement Initiative, which is a lot of words, but it basically means anyone that wants to know more about a pending zoning case can go there. They can search just by the names of the cases. They can search, it's map-based, so they can search and find, their house and look and see what's around there. They can leave comments. Those comments are passed along to the developer, and they're also shared with the council or the county commissioners. So if they're not able to attend a public hearing, there's still a way for them to provide some comment in their opinions and concerns or kudos.
Is there a time frame that they have to have input on a certain project by?
Usually, so we will pull comments down periodically up until the time that we have to prepare the agenda items for city council or county commissioners, but yeah. And then of course we have public hearings. We maintain the planning department has something called the Planning Notification Service, which is a weekly email that you can sign up for. And it lists all of the upcoming public hearings, regardless of which board it's before. It also contains information about neighborhood meetings, and those are meetings that applicants or developers are required to have before they even submit an application to get feedback from the community. So if people want to place something that lands in their inbox just once a week and gives them all those opportunities, I recommend that they sign up for that email newsletter.
And how do they do that?
They can go to the planning department's website, and there is a link right on the main page to do that.
Sarah, if residents have a question about what they can or can't do with their own property, or they're thinking about, say, adding an addition to their house or making any kind of other changes like a deck or something, what is it they have to do with that?
So I recommend that folks contact the Development Services Center. And the Development Services Center is a joint operation between the Planning Department and the Inspections Department where we help people navigate the development process. They can reach us by phone at 919-560-4137. They can reach us via email, planning@durhamnc.gov, or they can visit us in person. We're open Monday through Friday, 9 to 3 in City Hall on the ground floor. And we've got staff there that can help them in English or in Spanish and answer any development questions they have.
Thank you guys so much for joining me. An amazing show and very, very informational, especially for where we are at this time in Durham. Great, thank you. Well, that does it for City Life. Don't forget to follow us on social media and watch us on the Durham Television Network and on YouTube. And don't forget, you can listen to our podcast on iTunes. I'm Beverly Thompson. Thank you for joining me to learn more about city life in Durham.